The Leon Panetta 2015 Lecture Series, The Test of Leadership in 2015, Critical Issues That Can Unite or Divide America. This lecture series discusses energy. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Sylvia Panetta.
Good evening, everyone, and what a wonderful turnout we have. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you once again to the Monterey Conference Center in beautiful Monterey by the Bay for the 18th Annual Leon Panetta Lecture Series. I'm happy to be here with you tonight to launch another season of thought-provoking discussions. The lecture series is one of the Panetta Institute's landmark programs, and it was one of our first. And that goes back to 1997, when we first came back from Washington, when Leon had left as Chief of Staff. It seems like yesterday. Leon and I developed the Panetta Institute and the lecture series not simply because we wanted to bring scholars and experts and elected officials to our communities, but because we firmly believe that our democracy works best when discussion and debate are used to find solution and compromise. This year, we're tackling tough issues where Americans and our representatives in Washington are deeply divided. These issues represent the problems we must commit to addressing if we are to move forward as a great nation in this new century. Tonight, in our first lecture, our topic is energy. Energy is one of the key factors required for social, economic, and particularly industrial development. Since the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, the United States has rallied on fossil fuels to provide the energy that drives our economy. Today, we remain an energy-intensive economy. However, there are serious questions about the sources of the energy we depend on, the need for efficiency as well as impact on the environment and concerns about our safety. The debate is over how to meet U.S. energy needs and how it has simmered for several decades, intensifying, of course, when supplies are short and prices rise. But even today, with oil prices lower and new technologies lessening our dependence on foreign oil, can the United States feel secure in its energy future while still depending on a finite resource? As we examine energy policy and alternative fuel options, what should be the role of government? What should be the role of the scientific community? And what should be the role of the free market? Tonight, Secretary Panetta will discuss this issue with 4 experts from the scientific community, from the energy industry, from environmental regulation, and from the United States Senate and the White House. Our first guest has been at the forefront of the nation's environmental energy policies for more than a quarter of a century. She served as Florida's Secretary of Environmental Regulation and then 8 years as Administrator of the EPA in the Clinton administration. In that post, she adopted the most stringent air pollution standards in the nation's history. In 2009, she was named Director of the White House Office of Energy and Climate Change Policy. She oversaw coordination of environmental, energy, climate, and transport policies across the federal government. Please welcome Carol Browner. Thank you. Our second guest is a pioneer in science and energy policy. Co-recipient of the Nobel Prize in Physics, he is also the longest-serving Secretary of Energy to date. Serving in the Obama administration, he worked to invest in clean energy, reduce dependence on foreign oil, address the global climate crisis, and create new jobs. He is committed to the development of new technologies and business models that will accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. Please welcome Dr. Stephen Chu. Our third guest is a legendary oil man and philanthropist who has become one of the nation's most notable energy experts. In 1956, with just $2,500, he started what would become one of the largest independent natural gas and oil companies in the United States. In 2008, he launched a self-funded $100 million grassroots campaign aimed at reducing America's dependence on imported oil. He advocates for using domestic alternatives and developing even greater new technologies. Please welcome T. Boone Pickens.
Okay.
Thank you.
Got a nice crowd.
Oh yeah. Our fourth guest tonight was born and raised in the small coal mining town of Farmington, West Virginia. Elected to the U.S. Senate by a special election in 2010, he was re-elected for a second term in 2012. Among other important committee posts, he serves on the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. He is strongly committed to developing a national energy plan that utilizes all resources. He is also the author of landmark miner safety legislation. Please welcome Senator Joe Manchin. And of course, moderating the discussion is the man who created this lecture series 18 years ago, the chairman of the Panetta Institute, former director of the CIA, and former Secretary of Defense. Please welcome Secretary Leon E. Panetta. All yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2015 Panetta Lecture Series. Our theme this year is the test of leadership in 2015. Critical issues that can unite or divide America. We'll be talking about energy tonight, but we'll also be talking about race relations. We'll talk about the economy and the issues related to the economy, and then we'll talk about cyber as well. So we're in for some interesting discussions. But tonight we talk about energy. And I think energy is one of those issues that is critical to what happens to our country, what happens to our world in the 21st century. It is a tough, complicated, and complex issue. There are a lot of elements to energy, so many that many of us take it for granted as long as the lights go on when we turn the switch. But the reality is that that energy is extremely important to our economy, to our standard of living, to our lives, and to our planet. And there is no question that we are in the middle of a revolution in energy, and it will continue into the future. And the real question is whether there'll be pluses or minuses. And that's what we'll discuss this evening, are those pluses and minuses and where we're headed with this issue of energy. Let me begin with the question to our distinguished panel about kind of where we're at today. I think it's fair to say that right now, 80% of our energy comes from oil, coal, and natural gas. And it's said we live in the fossil age, fossil fuel age, goes back to the 1800s. but it's continuing today. And it's been a key to our economic success and obviously our standard of living. But we also know that carbon from these fossil fuels has impacted on our atmosphere and on our planet. There are, however, about 2 billion people in the world, in developing countries, many of whom do not have any access to modern energy at all. But during these next decades, they're going to want to improve their lifestyles. They're going to want to improve their standard of living. They're going to want to have a growing economy. It's estimated that we could have what we have now is about a $70 trillion global economy. It could go to about $130 trillion in these next number of years. We will go from 1 billion to about 2 billion vehicles, cars, as the societies all strive to improve. It's not likely that we will continue to be dependent on fossil fuels. We always thought there would be a point at which fossil fuels would ultimately diminish, but the reality is that they are abundant today, they're cheap, and they're developed, and it's likely that the rest of the world will continue to depend on these fossil fuels. So the question is, if I'm right, and if we continue to be dependent on fossil fuels for the next 30 or 40 years, what will be the consequences of that? Stephen?
Well, let me begin by saying that we will be using fossil fuels in the coming decades for sure, but also because of the risks of climate change, we have to take note of that. The technology is racing ahead for finding oil and gas, extracting at reasonable costs. The technology is also racing ahead for renewable energy of various kinds, wind and solar especially. We're going to have to make the transition. It will take decades. It doesn't happen overnight. It would take, by mid-century, I'm hoping, maybe 50% renewables, 50% energy on demand. But it's something we've got to do. The technology is not all in place, but it's something, if we really care about our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren, it's something we've just got to do.
Carol?
Well, first of all, thank you, and thank all of you for joining us here tonight for a discussion about such an important issue. I have come to believe that global warming, climate change, carbon pollution is the biggest problem the world faces, and so many problems will come as a result of our inability to address the issue. When you talk about fossil fuels being cheap, that's true. The technology to extract them has gotten better. They're a global commodity, so they're priced on a global platform. But we don't include in the cost of fossil fuels the cost of carbon pollution. And if we start to look at all of the externalities and to factor in all of the cost of continuing to use fossil fuels, renewables, efficiency, carbon-free sources of energy become that much more attractive. And I think that's where we will go. We've got a good down payment. We've started. I think we will go there even faster than probably we can imagine here tonight.
Boone, what do you think?
Well, we have the cheapest fuel in the world today. We have cheaper gasoline, oil, natural gas than the rest of the world. It's a temptation, of course. I mean, you'll always go for the cheap one. It's hard to talk somebody into it costing when they can get something cheaper to, use something more expensive. But the world today is using 92 million barrels of oil, and we are the biggest user of oil in the world. We're using 20% of that. We're using 18 million barrels a day, and we still import 6-7 million barrels a day to the United States. Next to us is China. China has a lot more people. They don't have near as many cars, and they don't use near as much gasoline as we do. But China uses 10 million barrels a day. We use 18. They're second, we're number one. So we're the biggest user. Is it going to change? Of course it's going to change over time, that we will go to other fuels, because eventually the the oil and gas in the United States is finite, and you will deplete, and you will, go out of the business. But when does that happen? We have 125 years supply of natural gas now. And so we have a lot of natural gas, and natural gas is very, very cheap today. If you do parity of oil to natural gas, it's 6-to-1. So if you had, we don't have, but $100 oil, you would have $16 natural gas. So if you have $50 oil, parity is $8 natural gas. Natural gas is $2.74. So natural gas is going to be cheap a long, long time. But you will go to different, fuels in the future.
Joe?
First of all, thank you for inviting me and being part of this, but thank all of you for coming. And I tend to deal with the facts the best that I can and try to get the facts the best I'm able to. But the bottom line is that my little state of West Virginia is a big energy producer. We're a net producer of energy, so we energize a lot of the East Coast. And we've been doing it for quite some time. We have coal, we have natural gas, we have wind farms, we have a little bit of hydro, we have a little bit of everything. So we believe in an all-in energy policy. I believe that we need to, from the federal public-private partnerships, find better ways to use the resources we have. We're going to use them. But the facts are there's 8 billion tons of coal being burnt in the world today on an annual basis. The United States of America burns less than 1 billion. But yet we're led to believe that it's because of us using coal that's caused global climate or caused global warming. And it's just not accurate. So I've said this: if you want to take on global climate and global change, then find a global fix. This is a plentiful resource that people are using. They have it available. We're not going to deny them. They've not. These are developing nations, and these are countries that are demanding more electricity and a better quality of life that we've sometimes taken for granted. With that being said, I think we could have a whole other technology revolution just on developing the new technology that would help us use it much cleaner and much better. And that's what I've been looking for and trying to find the balance. But in Washington right now, balance is hard to find. Find anybody that agree on anything's hard. But there's enough people that really do care. But it's a real challenge right now, and it's making this a hardship. I said it's almost America. We're trying to lead right now for lack of an energy policy, and I've always said this: if it doesn't, if it's not in the realm of reality, and the technology has not been advanced, but they're asking us to hit certain criterias, then it's unreasonable to ask us to do something that's unattainable until we have the technology. So when the federal government and the private sector get together and decide we're going to move this technology and advance it, and bottom line, in West Virginia, we would say this: if you have the technology and it'll do what we need done, and it's proven under commercial load, we'll do it. But don't put us in a situation that's unattainable because it's not been developed or proven yet. So that's what we've got to up our game a little bit more. But it's a challenging world out there.
Let's talk about the issue of energy as it relates to climate change. We know that CO2 and other greenhouse gases are part of this blanket around the Earth called the atmosphere, and that there's a careful balance in those gases that is very important to preserving life on Earth. There's obviously, some dispute as to whether or not it's real or not. I think it's fair to say that many scientists, or the majority of scientists, and others, believe that our climate has changed as a result of that. CO2 being released from carbon burned fossil fuels, along with deforestation. There are other contributions to it. We're also, worried about, and we see the kind of changes with regards to our climate, as far as increasing storms, rising seas, droughts here in California. But there's also a minority of scientists, Stephen, who disagree and say that our climate has always changed. CO2 has been released from natural processes, that CO2 is not the cause of climate change or global warming, although, and there probably are some people in Boston who might think that they're right these days. So I guess the question is climate change real? I mean, is it real? Do you believe it's real? And if it is real, then how do we confront it?
Well, first, let me just say that certainly if you look back in the historical record, going back to paleontology, we've had bunches of ice ages. You go back even further in time, beyond the last million years, but go back tens of millions of years. The climate of the Earth has changed radically. You can't blame that on humans. But there's two things to take away from this. Number one, there's no exquisite thermostat in the Earth that says we're going to maintain the climate at a certain temperature. So there was times in the past where the Earth was perhaps 8 degrees warmer. There was no ice on Antarctica. The sea levels relative to the land were hundreds of feet higher. The weather, we don't know what the weather was back then. We only know the fossil record. So number one, it has changed. The second thing is it could change naturally, but what virtually most of the scientists are saying, what we've been doing the last 100 years, but especially in the last 50 years, is we're inducing the change. What used to take geological times is now going to be taking 100 years, 50 years, 200 years. And that's very different. The fact that it changed naturally does not mean, you can get fevers naturally, but you don't want to go out and say, hey, because I can get sick naturally, you would want a healthy life practices to avoid getting sick to stimulate that. And so I think the scientists that I know who are they're saying, well, we're not 100% sure, and I'll be the first to say, you're right. We're not 100%. We may not even be 90% sure what's going to happen, but it's prudent risk management to say, look, if it's 80% sure, what do you want to do? If it's going to cost us as a society 0.5% of our GDP, as prudent risk management, and I think it will cost actually far less than that, because I have infinite faith in the ability of ingenuity of Americans to find the technological solutions. We should do this. So it's like why you have fire insurance and health insurance. You're not banking on getting cancer or your house burning down, but you're thinking, there's a chance and you could get wiped out. So it's really prudent risk management. If you say, I want to be 100% sure before I buy health insurance that I'm going to have serious heart problems or cancer, you wouldn't do this. Your lives wouldn't do this. And so I think that's the framework which it should be. You don't have to be 99 or 90% sure, but it's greater than 50% some bad things will happen.
Carol?
Well, I think it's important to note that the environmental laws that we've used in this country dating back to the early 70s are all similar in they recognize two things about science. One, it's never 100%. There's always outliers. And two, science changes, that we get smarter about something. We understand things that we didn't understand. They also recognize that the public policy makers have to make decisions. So, for example, in the Clean Air Act that Congress passed in the 70s and then modified in 1990, they said that EPA should look at the best available science, set a public health standard for the most common air pollutants. Very, 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 very simple. When I was at EPA, I had 8 great years of serving the American people. We set 2 air pollution standards based on that requirement. Best available science, protect the public health. We actually litigated those all the way to the Supreme Court, where we won 9-0 with Justice Scalia writing the majority opinion. Interesting. But the reason I talk about the Clean Air Act is because if we didn't allow for the fact that science evolves and changes, we would have never banned smoking in public places, because there's still debate about it and exactly what the health consequences are. We wouldn't have taken lead out of gasoline because there are still people debating what are the health consequences of lead in gasoline and exposure and to our children of lead in gasoline. So I think that what you have here is, what is the role of science? What is the public policy decision maker? And how do those two things work together? Congress tells the EPA to go do a set of things based on the science at a particular point in time. What the science tells us today about carbon pollution is pretty compelling. And that now leads us to try and have a public policy debate and make a set of decisions about how to best reduce that pollution.
Boone, Ted Cruz from your state doesn't think it's a problem. What's your view?
What did Ted say? I forgot.
Well, their governor said that Ted Cruz shouldn't be running for president because he doesn't believe in climate change.
But he is running.
Well,
He
but
is.
Jerry Brown doesn't think he should be.
He announced today. No, he basically said that that there really isn't climate change taking place. And I guess you're from industry. What do you think?
Well, I'm a geologist too, and it's pretty hard to convince me that we're having unusual climate. And I do. I understand we've put a lot of stuff in the atmosphere, but when you look at the planet, you're talking about billions, a couple of billion years, and there are periods in geologic time where you've been million years of drought, and we've had CO2 way beyond anything that we could ever imagine from volcanic action on the planet millions of years ago. So don't just walk off and talk about, in a few hundred years or a few thousand years. It's a lot longer period than that. And do I think that what we've done has caused us problems? I think I'm concerned to this point. If we think that it has, you should take some precaution. Don't wait till you get it confirmed. Yeah. If you do wait,
that's what Stephen was saying.
Yeah, if you wait till you get it confirmed, you've gone too far.
Yeah. What do you think from coal country?
Well, let me just talk from the Senate. There's 100 of us in the Senate, and I think we had a vote about a month ago, 98-2, that said that climate change is real, not a hoax. That's pretty unusual for 98 people to say that. The debate comes in how much is that, what percentage has humans affected it? That's the debate. And with that debate has been going on for quite some time. The other debate that we have in the Senate is how much should the EPA be driving the train? Okay? 10th Amendment, states' rights. I'm sure she won't come back on this.
I didn't comment.
So anyway, it's basically states' rights versus the federal government, and then you should not be able to regulate what you haven't legislated. Why do you send us there if we don't have an overview? So if they produce a rule or a finding, it goes through comment period, it doesn't come to us.
Yes, it does.
Well, sometimes it doesn't. Most of the big ones haven't. Anyway, so that's where the rub comes, and that's what we're going through right now. So basically, you have a lot of people that want to do away with the EPA, but I think there's more people that don't. And with that being said, can we find a balance? Can we have a little bit more input? Can the legislators have more input? And then find the technology to live within the world that we have. But
let's talk about
it's a tough time.
Let me talk about
that real quick, though.
Very
quick.
Okay.
So I'm obviously from the executive side, or served in the executive side, the elected. We're selected, they're elected. And when you're selected to run one of these large departments, you're not free to do just anything. You have a law, and you have to work within the box of that law. And if what you do inside that box somebody doesn't like, they have two choices. They can sue you, which, trust me, if you run EPA, you're sued daily. Or they can go to Congress and ask Congress to change what you've done. But you're not free to do just anything. Can I tell a quick story of why we are where we are on carbon and EPA?
The only thing I would say is you have to interpret, basically, do you all have the right to be able to set standards based on certain criteria without including all criteria.
Well,
as
it's what
far
Congress
as
says.
economic
Right.
hardships, things of that sort.
Sometimes Congress had set a public health standard. Sometimes they said
Yeah.
set an economic standard. And so you have to, whichever part of the law. But just you'll find this a good, amusing story. How did EPA get to regulate carbon, which is what they're doing? They've already done it for cars and trucks. Steve and I worked with the president on that program, Lisa Jackson and others. Now they've moved on to power plants. But here's the backstory. When I was running EPA, I got into a fight with Congressman Tom DeLay. Some of you may remember him. He was not a fan of EPA.
Texas.
He was nicknamed the Exterminator because, well,
Where was he from?
your state. Your state. And we got into this heated argument in a public hearing. I was testifying about the EPA budget, and he said to me, this is the mid-'90s, so Al Gore's written Earth in the Balance. He said to me, Carol, you're regulating carbon, you're regulating greenhouse gases. I said, no, we're not. He said, I know you are. I said, we're not. I said, we might be studying it because we have a lot of scientists and EPA studies cutting edge issues, but we are not regulating it. And then I said, I'm not even sure we have the legal authority to do it because when Congress rewrote the Clean Air Act in 1990, they didn't mention carbon. They didn't mention greenhouse gases. So Tom DeLay said to me, you should go ask your lawyers whether or not the law gives you the authority to regulate greenhouse gases. So I went back, I asked the lawyers, they took forever. 6 months later, they brought me a memo. And they said, if you make a scientific determination, if the EPA reviews all of the science and finds that greenhouse gases endanger public health and welfare, EPA has to regulate them. We give them the memo, I leave office, forget about the memo. The state of Massachusetts gets the memo, reads it, and says, well, EPA should be regulating carbon. We're going to sue the EPA for not regulating carbon. I'm not there, mind you. I've left. We're on to Bush. We've gone from Clinton to Bush. And lo and behold, the case goes to the Supreme Court over this very question. Does EPA have the authority under existing law, 1990 law, to regulate greenhouse gases? And guess what the Supreme Court rules? They do. So it's not like EPA is just out there doing something. There's a law which has now been interpreted by the Supreme Court, and EPA is required to move forward with these regulations. So, I mean, Joe,
Are you blaming this on Tom DeLay?
I totally am, totally. And here's the best part.
I see where you're headed.
Exactly. And okay, so the next time you see Tom DeLay, I
I'm
bet
going to
you
have Carol
anything
Browner
he
said
doesn't know.
You're responsible.
That his memo.
Well, let's take this to a more
I haven't
immediate.
seen Tom DeLay in 10 years.
He was on Dancing with the Stars.
Let me take this to.
I'm not making that up.
As we all are. All right, Keystone Pipeline. It became a symbol, really, of this debate that a little bit of which we've just gone through. Keystone Pipeline, 1,100-mile pipeline that would go from Canada, I guess, to Nebraska, but the whole purpose was it to take it ultimately to the Gulf.
It goes to Cushing, Oklahoma.
Yeah,
It's already built.
No,
No.
it's going to the Gulf.
But doesn't it
Okay.
go to Cushing and then it's
No.
up there?
It's basically to take heavy crude oil from Canada down to the Gulf. And it'd been studied for 6 years. Congress passed it, approving it. It was vetoed by the president. Obviously, those who are for it say it will produce needed jobs, help energy supplies, safer to transfer by pipeline than by trains. The oil would be used by China, if not the U.S., so it's going to get burned one way or the other. Those against it said the kind of oil that's involved here would provide further destruction of the climate. It's like 17% more carbon pollution from that particular tar sands oil, raises the risk of spill, and would not produce that many permanent jobs. Who's right? Joe?
Let me just start. First of all, when I was first asked about this, I went into the Senate after Bob Byrd died in 2010. I was in my second term as governor, had to make a decision. I go in. One of the first things that comes to my plate was the Keystone Pipeline. I said, tell me about this pipeline. Well, they're developing oil sands in Canada, and that oil is going to come into America and down to our refineries. And I just said simply, I'd rather buy from my friends than my enemies. So if you're going to buy the oil, you buy from your friends. We already buy 2.5 million barrels a day from Canada. So it's not something new, and it's not something we don't do every day. And next of all, make us less dependent on foreign oil, which we buy, as T. Boone said, about 6 to 7 million barrels a day. And we buy from Venezuela, we buy from Saudi Arabia, we buy from Russia, places that I don't believe use the proceeds from our money to our benefit. So with all that being said, it made sense to me. Next of all, they talk about no permanent jobs. I said, when I was governor, I built a lot of roads, I built a lot of bridges. I never created a permanent job after I did a construction job. So what the hell do you expect? We're going to have thousands of jobs, we'll build it, move on to the next project. That didn't make any sense at all. Next of all, they said, well, it's going to go right through and onto the ships. We got the Canadians to agree that basically that's not going to happen, nor would it happen. It has to go down to our refineries. But we export refined products from America, from oil that comes from Texas and everywhere else. We don't export crude. So Canada agreed that's not going to happen. So that's a misnomer. Next of all, they're going to pay the 8 cents per gallon for the 8 cents per barrel for the oil spill recovery in case there's a spill. They agreed to all these things. Carol and I both spoke about this. This is not about the pipeline. It's about developing the tar sands up in Canada. Canada's a sovereign nation. You're not going to stop them from doing it. Now, there's debate on whether that, if it doesn't come our way, will go west. It's coming our way, whether it comes by pipeline, truck, or whether it comes by rail. And what comes out of the Balkans right now, about 12% of that would go into that line too. So we'd have North America moving in there too. And it just makes sense to me that we should be doing this for the security of our nation. And if we have this much product coming into our country, we become more secured as a nation. We don't find ourselves in parts of the world we shouldn't be in, fighting someone else's battle, sacrificing our blood and our treasure. I've been very clear about that, and I was one of the Democrats who led the charge that we would vote with Republican colleagues. I also voted to override and repeal the president's veto. We came 4 short. We need 4 more Democrats. And that's where we are today.
I assume you're supportive of the pipeline.
This is the biggest gift that I have ever seen to our country. It absolutely gives us energy security for into the future as far as you want to go. Let me tell you how big it is. The oil sands, I lived in Canada in the 60s, and in November 68, I think, was when they created, the government did, that was the Great Canadian Oil Sand Project. And that was Fort McMurray, northern Alberta, is where the oil sands are. And I'll never forget the day they announced it. We all knew it was going to happen, but now it was announced they were going to do it. And the really smart guys in Calgary always went by the Petroleum Club after work. I was one of those people, and had a beer and talked about what had happened and all. But it was the guys knew what they were doing, and we talked about it. We left, and it was about 3 blocks. It's November, Calgary. It's cold, and Harley Hotchkiss, who's one of the really smart guys in Canada, that we were walking down the street about 3 blocks to our car. And he said, Boone, if this worked, you'd have to have $5 oil. That day, Canadian oil was $1.67. We didn't think it would happen. It did happen, and what happened was 250 billion barrels of oil is there in the Canadian oil sands. I'll give you a reference point here, that is what the Saudis claim they have, is 250 billion barrels. I don't believe that. They won't let you audit their oil, and I think it's probably 175 billion might get the Saudi oil. But here you have somebody has 250 billion barrels, equal or more than the Saudis have, and they are offering it to you. I mean, it's unbelievable that we would spend 6 years, and now Congress votes for it and the president vetoes it. And I don't understand. I mean, oil is going to be produced. Like you said, Canada is a sovereign country, and they're going to sell their oil. That's all there is to it. And you said goes west, it can go east too. And there I was with the Canadian ambassador to the United States, and I interviewed him on a podcast or something that I do. And he had plenty to say. And what it was is that we would rather do business with the United States with this oil than any place else. What we should do is to do a North American Energy Alliance and put Canada, Mexico, and the United States together. And we can help Mexico. They need technical assistance and they need money. The Canadians can take care of themselves, but put it together, and we do not need one drop of oil from any place but North America. We would capture it. And I know you want to make it short, but well, this is the most important question that I've had all day. Right. And so give me just a second longer on it. I know what I'm talking about on this. And it's been, they said that Nebraska turned it down. That's baloney. Nebraska voted 44-1 to have it. But they just wanted it moved over a little bit out of their sandhills. But I know something about this project. And we are absolute idiots if we ever let that oil get away from us.
Okay, that's your
I'll
that's
be
your
really
that's
brief.
your line.
You're an idiot.
Exactly. I'm the idiot. I was going to say I'm the idiot, so now we can move on.
I noticed
it may
when
be a
you
gift, T-Boone. It may be a gift, but it's a gift that comes with some strings I don't want, called carbon.
Oh, hey,
Okay,
the
Carol,
carbon is going to be produced.
Go ahead and explain your.
It's to extract some people call it oil sands, some people call it tar sands.
Don't say tar sands.
It takes a lot of energy, and it takes more energy than it takes to extract other fossil fuels. And I don't believe the world needs more carbon in it today.
Well, but what are you going to do? They're going to produce it.
That is not absolutely clear. It is not clear that they're going to produce it.
What part isn't clear?
Well, there's no pipeline. There's no pipeline to take it out the other ways that you're talking about, and there's no guarantee that they're going to get a pipeline going west.
Well,
right?
You know they are, Carol. The Canadians. Well,
they're just going to buy off the native. What are they? The native people of Canada.
First Nation. Just like we have Indians in the United
First
States.
Nation.
Well,
Yeah,
I can tell you.
But let's not go to the
Indians in Canada are just like the ones in the United States. You can take care of it with money. I mean,
I'm just going to remain. Remain the idiot.
Wait a minute. I can only handle one controversial issue at a time. Let me ask the Secretary of Energy.
Take it away from us.
I'm going to weigh in. I'm going to weigh in as the half idiot. So I really think if I were not the Secretary of Energy or the President of the United States, but Emperor of Energy, which is a much more powerful position.
The what of energy?
Emperor.
The what?
Not the czar.
No, Emperor.
Okay.
Whatever you say happens. So I see a lot of stuff, but seriously. The oil sands does require a lot more energy. I'm actually trying to help a little company in Vancouver, which in part is funded. It's for capturing carbon from coal and natural gas plants. But what Alberta has done, and most Americans don't realize this, is they say, well, our source of oil does have more environmental impact, whether it's 17% or 20% or something like that. It's roughly 20% more. And the open pit mining that originally started in Fort McMurray is now shifting to you boil steam, you inject it into the ground, and you bring it up that way. And so there's more of a carbon footprint, and the type of oil is very tarry, it's harder to ship, it's harder to refine. So Calgary has said, we will tax ourselves internally on that extra 20%. They're, I think, at a $40 a ton carbon, self-tax. Most of the money goes to the industry to say, can you figure out a way to decrease the carbon emissions from this? Okay? And some of it goes to funding carbon capture of not only the oil sands, but for coal and gas plants. And that's a bit of what's funding this little company, which I want to look for a technical solution. So if I were president and Congress together, I'd say, look, let's cut a deal. Let's recognize, let's get something at a price on carbon. Let's move this thing forward, recognizing that, we have, instead of going to one corner and the other side going to the other corner, and just coming out with the gloves on, let's cut a deal. This environmental thing is really real. Let's actually start to put a price on this. Help the industry begin to decarbonize. It doesn't go 100% goes to zero. You can go down in steps. And my exit discussion with the president, I said, well, it's not going to happen. Realistically, it's not going to happen. But I think we should, it's unfortunately, this debate has been so polarizing. And people going into these opposite corners where you say, look, do we have a real carbon problem? And yes, of course, we'd like to buy oil from Canada. There is an issue of Canada getting across the First Nations. The people in British Columbia, the First Nation countries, that could be delayed 5-10 years. They're shipping it by railroad, which is what they're doing now, which also has dangers and issues. And so it's a complicated thing, and it's, let's get past this. Let's work together and find a real solution to decarbonize and get it clean. It is a real problem. And so, again...
So you're half an idiot.
What's a real...
I'm only half an idiot.
I'm a full.
What's a real problem?
The fact that this particular type of oil requires, you could argue it requires much more energy inputs, which means the overall life cycle of the carbon emitted from this kind of oil, from the refining, the transportation, and the extraction, especially when you go steam underground through the so-called SAG process, it's not as energy economical as the open pit mining, which was done, because it's transitioning very rapidly to the cheap stuff. The scraping of the earth it's transitioning to using natural gas to generate energy, to steam, to inject it in there. And it's a lot of energy to pipe that stuff. That's viscous stuff. And so...
Well, when it's coming out of the reformers there at Fort McMurray, it's WTI quality.
What's WTI?
West Texas Intermediate.
That's how we're priced in
That's how
America.
we're priced in the U.S.
In order to put it in a pipeline, they have to put chemicals to make it so that it can go in these pipelines a little bit more nicely than
And
when
the
it's
Vulcan, the Vulcan helps it flow better.
Yes,
too.
right. And when they're getting the stuff out of the deep stuff, they actually have to have an additive.
If I say something very quickly, if we buy, I'm understanding the same type of a crude, a heavy crude that comes out of Canada is about the same consistency of the crude that comes out of Venezuela.
No, that's not correct.
It's not correct?
No. It's not correct.
Not heavy
No,
crude?
when you put it through the reformers up there, you come out with light sweet.
Okay.
The
The bottom
now
line is,
you do have some heavy.
but we could eliminate buying from Venezuela if we took this.
We could quit buying from Venezuela in the morning.
But we're getting into the really technical stuff.
Suffice it to say, not all oil is the same, and not all refineries can refine all oil. So that's part of the issue. What do we need in the refineries that we have, and is this part of solving the problem because our refineries don't have precisely what they need?
Carol, you would,
Simple.
if Steve's right, and you could you could remove the carbon or diminish the carbon in it, then it would make more sense, right?
If there is a way to capture the carbon, and it's a technology that would work not just for oil fields, but it would work in other places, that would be a terrific advancement. And I think it's something that you would be very, very supportive of, West Virginia. I mean, this is the big question. Can we grab carbon and sequester it?
Well,
Yes.
is it technologically, is that possible?
It's possible. Again, this little company is working with Hunt Oil. Things of, at $45 a barrel, there's a lot of things on hold in the oil industry. But the idea is that you can capture the carbon from the fossil that you're using to generate the steam. You can actually put that into the ground, and the carbon dioxide in some of those formations actually makes it flow easier and everything, and you lose a lot of it, as in you sequester it. So this is a possibility that by recycling carbon dioxide, getting some of the stuff out, but leaving a lot of it underground is, that's why I'm willing to pitch in and say I want to help this company.
Let me.
You're saying you're for the Keystone Pipeline then?
I didn't say that.
He's saying he's half for it.
Well,
But,
you're
we should back
for it
up
with
for a
conditions.
second. I think it might be worth just backing up for a second and reminding everybody. We don't use, basically, in the United States, oil to make electricity. Hawaii's a little bit of an exception, but we use oil in the transportation sector. And there are a lot of other things going on in the transportation sector, right? Our cars are getting more and more efficient. By 2025, the average fuel...
CAFE standards was good.
CAFE's good. You agree with me on CAFE.
You bet. I agree with you on CAFE standards.
It's 54.5 miles per gallon. That's what your fleet average has to hit.
I want that on the trucks. And
It is on the
the
trucks.
trucks are only getting 5 miles.
No, it's going to be on SUVs and light
trucks and
pickups.
cars.
Light pickups and
duty
SUVs.
They won't be,
pickups.
but
Now,
you
what
say
do you-
all in.
It's your fleet. So
The
if I'm
fleet.
on
About
board,
18,
it's my
I'm
fleet
about
30
average.
on
A pickup truck will get 30 miles a gallon, 25 miles a gallon.
Not
right?
on an 18-wheeler, you're not.
No,
No,
a
not on
pickup
an 18-wheeler, but a pickup
Light truck.
On a clean diesel right now. You can,
So
but,
it's for the pipeline?
so it's just, as we talk about the oil, think about it on the transportation side, although I know there's
How
lots
many
of
of you
natural
all think
gas
we should build a
opportunities.
pipeline or have the pipeline here?
How many believe we should?
How many
How many are opposed?
How many are opposed?
How many
so
have
it-
no opinion?
It's
They don't care.
it's a tight issue. Let me take you to another tight issue.
Well,
which
there
is,
were more for it than against it.
well,
No, actually, there were
Maybe you
more
count
people who
faster than
raised
I
their
do.
hand.
Okay. Now you were going to go back to that 65%
Let me-
that didn't vote. Those are the ones I represent. Yeah. Okay, but don't leave this point though But what was it? That's what happens when you
oil's
get old.
important. Fracking. Speaking of oil, fracking is. I want to deal with this before we go into the break. Obviously, there's been a big boom in shale oil and gas fracking. It's impacted a number of states. Your state, Texas. It's something that is occurring here in California, Pennsylvania. It's obviously become subject of great debate. EPA actually was taken out of the ability to develop any standards with regards to fracking by legislation that was passed when, Carol?
It was in the 05 Energy Act.
The
It's
05
referred to as the
Energy
Cheney
Act.
Amendment.
That was very good.
Those.
That was good. Well, it was. The state of Texas can take care of fracking. We do not need the federal government to do it.
I understand. I understand. The issues here are obviously those that are concerned about it are concerned about the damage to water aquifers, the chemicals used, and obviously some have said it may contribute to earthquakes. At least in Oklahoma, I guess they've had some concerns about that. Certainly true for California. Those who believe it's important relates to helping to make America energy independent. We've had a tremendous amount of both oil and natural gas that have come out of this process. We are less dependent on Middle East oil as a result of that. It's been an economic boon to the states and communities that have engaged in it, and it's certainly produced a lot of jobs, although with the price of oil where it's at, that's beginning to impact. I guess those involved say the fracking actually takes place below the water aquifers, so it doesn't impact on
Not
those
very far,
aquifers.
2 miles.
About 2 miles, yeah. And that the chemicals can be managed. Who's right on this issue of fracking? Boone, you've done fracking, so let me turn
I
to
sure
you.
have. I've fracked over 1,000 wells in my life. I've never had one failure. Now, somebody said, wait a second, Pickens. You have fracked some wells that became dry holes. That's a failure, yes, but I have not had a mechanical failure. But you don't always get what you want after a frack job. But it's, but no, we've
You
never.
should explain fracking. Like you
Yeah,
go
no,
down and
yeah,
you go
no,
that
yeah,
way.
I think for most of the people here, we've
Vertical,
heard about fracking. And just give us a brief description.
I don't care who you see. in the next 10 years, nobody will have seen as many frack jobs as I have. I got out of school in 51, and I witnessed my first frack job in 52. It was done with diesel, bad fluid. Now we use gel water. But then, that's when you first started, but there's no damage. I mean, you talk about aquifer. The largest aquifer in North America extends from Midland, Texas, to the South Dakota border across 8 states. It goes right across the aquifer. Doesn't go across. My ranch sits right in the aquifer, and I have 70,000 acres. 250 miles north of Midland, Texas, and we now have drilled 44 wells on my ranch. They're all horizontal, and they've all been fracked. Most of them are fracked 22 to 24 sections in the horizontal hole. And we've had no problems with anything. And we have another 62 wells to drill. And does it concern me? No.
You drink the water.
Pardon me?
You drink the water from the aquifer. You drink it.
Well,
the water.
Of course we do.
Okay, see?
It meets
I'm
all,
agreeing with you.
I know, it meets all drinking water standards. The aquifer does. No damage has ever been done to it. I said 800,000 wells had been fracked, drilling through the aquifer, and a lot of them are vertical, but horizontal too, have been fracked, and no problems. And Rex Tillerson, much smarter guy than I am, he runs Exxon. He said it had been 1 million wells. So.
But Stephen, you did this for the students this afternoon, but give us a brief description of just exactly what fracking is.
Well, it's 2 things. It's both using hydraulic pressure to crack the rock where it is. The rock where you find oil and where you find natural gas is really pretty solid. It really looks like rock. It's non-porous. And what you can do is you go down and you go sideways. You can go sideways for 1 mile. You can go sideways for 2 miles. You can actually guide that bit within a seam that's maybe as tall as this auditorium or less for 2 miles, 1 mile. You have a pipe, you puncture it, and you force water in it, and the water fractures the rock. And you can control how much of the rock you want to fracture. Typically, you're 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet deep, sometimes deeper. The water tables are hundreds of feet to maybe 500, 1,000 feet deep. So the issue is, how do you protect the water tables as you go through? How do you actually recover? You're cracking what looks to be pretty solid rock, little pores that bring the oil and gas out. When you do this, actually, sometimes you have what's called flowback. This is water you've put in, but sometimes also water you get out. You've got to figure out what to do with that flowback water. You can't dump it on the ground because it's like mining water. You can't put it into a sewage treatment plant because, candidly, sewage treatment plants are not geared to dealing with mining type water.
Steve, what you do when you're flowing back, it goes into what they call a reserve pit.
Right. So what happens immediately, it goes into a pit above land that has plastic liners that you want to be double lined and make sure that that doesn't leak out into the surface water table.
Like landfill linings.
And then what's happening now is you take that water, typically, you reprocess it, you use that water to refracture other things. But in many places, if there's a lot of flowback, as there is in Oklahoma, you get a lot of water and then you inject it back into the ground. So there's been a lot of seismic activity in Oklahoma because they're taking the flowback water, they're re-injecting it into the ground because you can't put it in your sewage system. You certainly can't put it in the above ground stuff. And it's causing a lot of concern of all this new seismic activity.
Wait a minute. It's causing a lot of concern where?
In Oklahoma. Yes, believe me. But you don't have to believe me, you can look it up.
I don't have to look it up. I'm from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
No, but what you're talking, the concern they have up there is the seismic. The fracturing. They
Yes.
pick it up off the seismic.
That's right.
Yeah. But But that has nothing to do with the water.
No, sorry. They establish the reinjection wells before they do the frac job. And as they inject the water, they're inducing a lot of seismic activity from the
Well, you're saying a lot of seismic activity.
Yeah.
Stephen, you're setting up a seismic tool, and what they're doing is they're not doing it checking earthquakes. What they're doing is checking how far out from the horizontal hole the fractures extend. Is what that seismic.
No, I'm talking about magnitude 3, magnitude 4, sometimes magnitude 4.5 earthquakes.
No, I have many 4.5s on there. They're 2, 2.5.
Most of them are 2, 2.5. You can't even feel those.
That's right.
I agree.
I mean, this is stuff in California you laugh at.
I have a good friend who's a geophysicist who is and we talk a lot about this, Mark Zoback at Stanford, and he has been called in. He has no bone to pick. He's not against fossil in any way.
No, he's a good professional. I know him.
Yeah, Mark Zoback's a good
Sure.
man. He's been a longtime friend for many decades, and we talk a lot about this.
I agree.
And he is telling me that there's a lot more seismic activity from the water being reinjected into the ground. That's
So
all.
not from the original fracking?
No, not from the original fracking.
You're talking about just where they're putting water away.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
Right.
I'm not.
Right.
I didn't know that.
Let me take this to Joe because you dealt with it as governor in West Virginia, and some of these same concerns were raised in West Virginia. How'd you deal with it?
Well, basically, West Virginia, we're one of the few states, or one of the first states that basically has guidelines to meet. There's legislation passed in the legislature that says how you will encase it all the way through formation, all the way down to the play, if you will, and then whether it's.
I'm laughing because listen, Joe, this is my business, and you're sitting here telling me the legislatures in West Virginia got it all fixed.
Well, we didn't get it fixed. What we.
Come on. He's asking about the seismic. What are you all doing about it?
My business is the legislature, and the legislatures that get public approval or public support. And if you're going to get public support, you have to pass the safety measures or the perception of safety measures. So we did it. Maybe we overdid it, but basically we have to double wall, cement all the way to formation. You might say that's an overkill.
And the purpose of that is to what?
To get public acceptance that
No.
for the protection.
What are you trying to protect?
Oh no, basically, so there's no permeation, there's no leakage whatsoever, and it basically gives the public comfort that we're not going to permeate, the water,
the aquifer, and
any of that.
Joe, we have comparing Texas to West Virginia.
We beat Texas in
like
basketball and football.
We're not playing football or basketball, and I'm for your team. They're getting ready to play Kentucky, and we've got a tough game there, I can tell you. But Joe, we have so much more experience than you have in West Virginia. And, I mean...
we just didn't want to stop the process. We believe in fracking. We think it works, and we want to have public support. That's all.
Yeah, and I said, they're fracking a well tomorrow on my ranch. Somebody said, well, what do you do when they do that? I said, what do you mean? Well, aren't you up there to see what happens? Hell no, I don't go up there to see what happens. I know what happens. I don't have to go to the ranch to see.
Carol, just to wrap this up.
Okay.
EPA was out of the standards, but the president issued some standards, I think, through the Interior Department. That's on federal land, I take it.
Yeah.
Not on private land.
Not on private lands. No.
And the federal standards were basically related to water capture.
Yep.
As well as disclosure of the chemicals.
Right. So what the EPA regulates lots of activities on private lands because they may impact waters that are shared by all of us. They may impact the air. In the case of fracking, EPA cannot regulate by act of Congress what happens beneath that. So when the pipes go down, all of that, EPA no longer does that. It does continue to regulate what happens above. So, for example, how the wastewater gets stored, if there are air emissions, air pollutants as part of the processing, EPA regulates that. Separately, and so one of the issues EPA has been looking at is methane releases, fugitive and other methane releases from a natural gas site. Separately, on public lands that we all own, the public owns, the president, they're leased and people go in and frack and mine and do all sorts of activities on them. The president can issue regulations, and so he has proposed a set of requirements about not just what happens on top, but what happens down below. The amount of actual fracking as a percentage on federal lands is relatively small.
Let me interrupt right
But let me just finish. I'm going to give one more fact. Just
No,
a fact.
I'm going to, it ties in exactly what you're talking about. Okay.
You're older, so you can go.
No, there are very few wells fracked
On public lands.
offshore.
This is not offshore. This is
this is on public
This is
lands.
on the
No,
lands.
I'm
This is
talking
not
about
the
federal lands
OCS.
in the Gulf of Mexico.
Oh, I see.
But it's not. This is not about the federal lands. So the U.S. government, the public, own two things. We own lands, like walk outside on the land, and then we own the offshore, where like the BP rig was in the Gulf of Mexico.
Outer continental shelf.
OCS, the outer continental shelf. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about on the land. The activities where you take
The real land.
the real land,
yeah.
not the
You don't
OCS.
have to get in a boat to go
You don't
do
have
it.
to get in a boat and like go along
Can I, Leon,
that land. But
go ahead, sorry.
Finish your thought.
no, go ahead.
I want to tell a Rex Tillerson story. I hope he'll forgive me. It's not actually. When this fracking issue came up, for whatever reason, the president said to the Department of Energy, which doesn't have formal jurisdiction, it's really Interior and EPA. But they decided to give it to me in the Department of Energy to say, how do you establish a framework to set up guidelines? Ultimately, it would be EPA and Interior. Because maybe the president thinks someone knows. I'm a
because
nerdy
they have
scientist.
the laws and you didn't.
Yes, so we didn't have a bone to pick about these things, and so he said, well, so I said, fine, I'll put up a little committee and I'll work with them. Mark Zoback, I asked to join. There's a few others, and then Rex Tillerson calls me up and says,
Who?
Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil. He calls me up and
He's
said,
not a geophysicist, but
he calls, but you said he was a smart person, I agree. and he said, Mr. Secretary, this committee is no good. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, there's no one on this committee who actually runs oil and gas and has actually ground experiences. So while I have this person, but if I pick someone from the oil industry, whether it's ExxonMobil or Chevron or whatever, it's not tenable because all the other companies would say, so I couldn't do that. I couldn't pick a regulator, an active regulator, for the same reason. So so the conversation goes on, and he starts to say, there's no one has any proof that there's been any environmental damage. So we talk. And finally, after about a half an hour, he says, I said, look, Rex, and I know, there have been accidents.
there have been what?
Accidents. There have been accidents. Maybe not in Texas and Oklahoma, but there have been accidents. And finally, after like 40 minutes, he says, I told Audrey he shouldn't have done that. This is Audrey McClellan.
Aubrey.
Yeah. And I said, Rex, see, you know that there have been accidents. He said, well, yes, there have been accidents. And there have been imprudent things done. And those companies are risking. ExxonMobil is, I think, a responsible company. They're trying to do the right thing. And he said, these guys.
But the other companies are not trying to do the right thing.
I think not all the companies are trying to do the right thing. I think that
I do. I think they're trying to do the right thing.
I don't think so.
All right, let me
And neither does Rex Tillerson.
let me call this
Let
me call this to a pause because we've gone well over the first hour, and let me take the time to recognize, if I can, our question review team. They're the people that select the questions from the audience that I'll present to the speakers. And I'd ask you to hold your applause till after I finish introducing them. Julie Copeland, who's city editor, Santa Cruz Sentinel. Jeannie Evers, who's a feature editor and assistant news editor for the Monterey Herald. Fran Gaver, who is our regular question review team and an attorney with Leach and Walker. Doug McKnight, who's a reporter for KAZU Radio. And Jeff Mitchell, who's a senior writer and political columnist for the Salinas Californian. Would you thank them, please, for me? We also have a group of students that are with us this evening who attended the afternoon student program. And what I'd like to do is to ask all of the students in attendance to please stand. All right. Thanks very much. They come from 10 schools in the area. We have the California Maritime Academy in Vallejo, Defense Language Institute, Middlebury Institute for International Studies at Monterey High School, Monterey Peninsula College, the Navy Postgraduate School, San Lorenzo Valley High School, Santa Catalina School, Santa Clara University, and the University of California at Santa Cruz. This afternoon, we assembled all of these students. We almost had close to 400 students. And the student program is made possible because of the generous support of our lecture series sponsors. And so Sylvia and I, along with the Panetta Institute Board of Directors, are very grateful for the sponsorship that allows these students from high schools, colleges, universities, the military installations to be able to participate. This gives them a chance to hear this same discussion and be able to look at the kind of issues that are going to impact on them not only now but in the future. So I would appreciate it if you give all of our sponsors a hand. Let me ask the question because I'm not quite sure whether it's, I hear it on ads and you never know. Are we energy independent today?
No. North America, Canada, United States, Mexico could be energy independent. We're importing a whole bunch of oil still.
But you could replace that oil with natural gas that you have. So energy independent, you are energy independent.
We could
if you manage your resources and get rid of, if you want. But when you get rid of that, you're going to get rid of Canadian oil and Mexican oil, which I don't want to do. And you don't either. You said you'd like to see them all put together.
I would like a deal made to pay attention to the climate as well. That's what I would like.
Carol, are we energy independent?
We are certainly less dependent, and hopefully that will allow us to make wiser decisions about wars we fight and things of that nature. But ultimately, I think the real test is what are we doing on carbon and what are we doing in terms of our energy use while we drive down our carbon emissions. And that's on both the transportation and the electricity side.
Joe?
Well, we could be and we should be, but it's hard to explain that we're energy independent when we're still buying so much oil on a daily basis, 6, 7.
I can explain it real quick.
Okay.
Because the natural gas will replace the oil if you want to use it for transportation.
Well, we agree on this is basically is transforming our transportational fuels.
T. Boone, first question goes to you. Is the price of oil really a factor of supply and demand, or is it politics, power, and control?
Well, EPA sets the price for oil.
That's right. And we do a damn good job of it.
You're doing real good right now.
It's really cheap right now.
It's not a free market for oil because we all will accept the fact that OPEC is a cartel.
Right.
And they will adjust supply to fit if the price goes down. Now, I've got to go so far now. 3 months ago, they came up with a new policy.
Right.
They are not going to reduce supply to get the price of oil up. They say that we, the United States, is to blame for the price of oil dropping from $100 a barrel to $50 a barrel, which is true. We produce too much oil in the United States, and we did cause the price to go down. We're the cause. The Saudis are 100% correct. When Naimi tells you that I'm talking about now for Saudi Arabia, he said we're going to produce 9.6 million barrels a day, and we're going to keep our market share, whatever the price of oil is. If it goes down, too bad. Let the one that produced too much oil, the United States, is the one to adjust down. Well, the United States does not have a state-owned oil company. And Saudi Aramco is owned by the Saudis, and they could adjust their production down. In the United States, you can't tell 1,000 producers that we're going to adjust it down. Now, if I could take 2 minutes to tell you and take you back to the 60s, when in 1970 we reached all-time peak in the United States of 10 million barrels a day. And at that point, we were the swing producer for the world. And if I had a well that would produce 100 barrels a day, then I could produce 3,000 barrels a month if that was the allowable. That's not the way it worked. They said, we're going to cut back on producing days. And so in the 60s, you went back to 26 days a month. You could produce 100 barrels a day. Then you went down to 22, and you went clear down to 8 because of the price of oil. The Texas Railroad Commission was trying to adjust supply to meet demand and keep the price up.
So this was a state agency doing this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, Texas was a swing producer, is what it was. We assumed that role of swing producer. It's in the 60s. So in 1973, you had the Arab embargo. Now, my God, we were cut off from oil from the Mideast. And they turned to Texas and said, turn it on. Give us the oil that we've been pinched back on. Well, we found out that the wells had declined. And my 100 barrel a day well wouldn't produce 100 barrels a day for 30 days. It wouldn't, to get, I had to produce 30 days to get 1,500 barrels. That's when we found it. They said, why don't you turn on the oil? We did turn on the oil. We didn't have it. It wasn't there. And so we no longer were a swing producer. Then it went to the cartel and the Saudis. Is the price of oil, is it a free market? No, it's not a free market.
Carol, have you changed your position on the further development of domestic nuclear power? And do we actually have the ability to control this technology in a reliable and safe manner?
So I have changed my position on nuclear. I used to be opposed to nuclear, and about, 15, maybe 12 years ago, as I started to think more about carbon pollution, I realized that it just wasn't, I couldn't have a position on carbon-free energy and oppose nuclear, which is carbon-free energy. About 20% of our base load electricity comes from existing nuclear power plants in the United States today. And while we're trying to reduce carbon from burning fossil fuels, we can't simply get rid of a source of electricity that is carbon-free. You know, building new nuclear in the U.S., Stephen and I, when we were part of the Obama administration, tried hard, and we had some success. But it's very challenging because nuclear produced power sells into the market at a higher price point than other electricity. So for example, natural gas is very cheap right now. That's selling into the market at a much, much lower price point. If we had some sort of restrictions on carbon, that would start to probably change that pricing differential. But I do think that...
You mean that you wouldn't use natural gas?
No, you would use natural gas.
It's cleaner than anything else.
It's not cleaner than nuclear.
Okay.
It's not. Nuclear is carbon-free, and natural gas is definitely cleaner than coal, but it is not cleaner from a carbon perspective. You know, and the other thing I came to appreciate is that while obviously 3 Mile Island did happen in the United States, and you had horrible things at Fukushima and you had Chernobyl, the nuclear power industry has had 2 deaths in the U.S., 2. They were both accidents involving people working in the facilities, obviously very tragic. The fossil fuel industry has just struggled with a lot more health issues in terms of public health consequences, in terms of worker safety. You've been, out front and very outspoken on some of the mining incidences. And so, yes, I am pro-nuclear.
2 accidents. The oil and gas industry has had 2 accidents. The one, the BP
that was
blowout.
Kind of a big one.
And what?
That was kind of a big one.
Well, you had 11 people get killed.
I know. And a lot of oil.
Well, but the oil has been pretty well absorbed into the environment now. But let me go to the second accident. You only had 2 accidents.
And Exxon?
What?
And Exxon Valdez?
Well, that was a drunk. That
It was still an accident.
No, I said blowout.
Oh, blowouts. Okay, so
Yeah.
you had BP, you had the Macondo, which is BP. What's the other one?
Santa Barbara.
Oh, Santa Barbara.
Yeah, in the 60s.
Well, there are two. Those are 2 major blowouts. There are, as you well know, there are a lot of blowouts in the oil industry.
Well, a lot of blowouts. I mean, very. Well, wait a minute. Laugh.
No,
but hold on.
But those 2 had major environmental consequences.
Yes,
That's
they
what
did.
we're talking
I agree.
about.
And Valdez was.
Valdez.
Yeah, but Valdez was a drunk bus driver that hit the big rock in the Valdez Canal out there.
That's true.
He did.
Steve, let me just pick up on the nuclear issue because of you've looked at this issue. It's been a while since we've been able to put a nuclear plant back on. I guess there are 2 units in Georgia that have just been approved, and I guess we'll go in 2020 or something like that. But when you look at nuclear power, and there obviously have been so many different versions of nuclear plants. Standards have varied. How could we possibly? But still, nuclear produces a good chunk of our electricity, and it's true
20%.
abroad as well. So, how do we try to improve so that nuclear power can be much more viable? What's the secret?
Well, first let me describe the problem. The problem is we, the United States, but actually the world, hasn't built a new generation of nuclear power plants for a while. There's one going up in Finland, one going up in France, 2 in the United States, and maybe another 2, but maybe not. And all of them are behind schedule. The one in Finland and France are like 3 times the cost, and way behind schedule. And and that's what actually, before 3 Mile Island, the nuclear power plants were getting more and more behind schedule. Companies were going bankrupt because they were borrowing, by the way, cost of a 1 gigawatt nuclear power plant weighs in about $8 billion. If you can bring it on schedule, on budget, could easily go to $10 billion or more.
But Stephen, what was causing those overruns?
There were a number of things causing the overruns. One is that every plant was slightly different. And then the NRC had to do a whole new licensing for every plant. You should have made standard plants as much as the same. There was cost overruns, there was higher concern. First, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, bad.
Well, that was a poor design plant, right?
The Chernobyl plant was an old reactor design from the days of Fermi that was known to they could go unstable.
Yeah.
The Fukushima plant was the GE Mark I design. It was a first-generation nuclear power plant that no one ever thought would have this complete meltdown. Reactor number 1 at Fukushima, the whole bottom of the reactor, by muon energy, it's now melted down and passed through the reactor into the container.
But we know now that you would never build a reformer on a fault. And we have done... should never...
Well, we have this is your sensitive territory here in California about that.
That's true. Stay off. Put them inland. Put them inland. Off the
No,
ocean.
you
always
can't.
put 'em near the water.
You got to put them near a major
water.
river or an ocean
Near
for the
water.
You
cooling.
can get water.
So anyway,
Cooling,
but
need a
look,
lot of it.
it's a complicated issue, but there's a fundamental economic thing. If you can't build them on budget, on time, no bank would ever loan you the money. It's just too risky. There were a number of utility companies in the United States that went positively bankrupt because they were delayed and late and just went bankrupt. Yeah. Then they were bought up by another utility company, 10 cents on the dollar. And yet even today, when the full cost of the nuclear power plants, they exist today, they're totally written off. But the way we sell electricity in the United States is you do day-ahead bidding. 90% of the electricity sold today is you go out to an open market and say, the utility company says, who wants to buy, who wants to sell me electricity tomorrow? At what cost? Natural gas is dominating this day-ahead bidding. 95% of electricity is sold that way. Nuclear power can't compete with natural gas, so they're losing business. Now, it's a funny thing. What about wind? You know what the natural gas guys do? They say, you know, if the wind blows, we'll buy it from wind because it could be really cheap because of production tax credits and a number of other things. But we can guarantee the supply of energy. And meanwhile, nuclear, which is a totally written off plant, totally depreciated, existing, may have 20 years, you know, they can't use it. And so our energy security, if it goes all to natural gas and nothing else, is very scary. You want a mix.
What's scary?
You want a mix of energy in the United States. I want to see wind, I want to see solar, I want to see not all natural gas. You want a little bit of other mix as well as a little bit of nuclear. But the
Well, you're not saying a little bit of natural gas because you got a base load.
I think, you know, in 30 years, 40 years, we could be half renewable.
We'd be half what?
Half renewable. California by, what is it, 2025?
Right. Yeah. Half would be renewable.
32% of California by 2030 will be renewable.
That's their commitment.
But the entire national grid's not.
I'll be
needed.
102 then.
He'll still be around.
He'll still be alive. You said you were going to live to 114.
That's what the doctor said. I didn't say that.
No. If you're really kind of interesting and ordinary, you're going to live a long time.
Get this thing done quicker.
But I'm just saying the economics of nuclear is very, very bad at the moment.
It's tough. Yeah,
it's tough.
It's tough. Let's go to Joe. Is in fact the idea of, quote, clean coal a myth produced by coal companies to block, delay, or stop federal regulations designed ultimately to prevent the burning of coal and its impacts on global warming?
Well, clean coal technology is basically, can you use the product in a cleaner fashion? We don't. I mean, people are visualizing we're going to wash it and make it somehow cleaner. That's not going to happen. But the bottom line is it's a resource that has made the country what we are today. We're the superpower because of the natural resource that we had, domestic coal in this market. If it wasn't for that, you wouldn't be the superpower sitting here today. If we had to be buying our energy from other countries as we were developing, we wouldn't have what we have. So with that being said, if someone came to me, and I've said this before, and they said we have a new fuel in the future, and in 5 years we're going to transform into commercial hydrogen. Well, you know, fine, we'll do it. We'll be part of this great country, and we'll make our economy adjust to that. But that's not the case. You're going to use fossil. The world's going to use more than ever in the history of the world, and we can do it and do it much better. But the technology is not there. Give you an example. They've gone to at first you were going to carbon capture sequestration, finding out that has not been economically feasible. The Kemper plant's $2 billion, which is an AEP plant down in the South. Southern Company has it. So they've taken that off. Now they're going ultra supercritical and trying to base it off of that in another plant up in Canada. And so they're all over the board. The bottom line is we don't have the technology under commercial load. And I've just said this. If you're going to do it, then the federal government's got to jump in with both feet. Private sector's got to meet them and jump in with both feet. And they've got to design the technology that works. Then put it under commercial load. That means put it out in the field, make sure this plant, let's say 500 megawatts or greater, will run for 12 months under load. And then that should be proven technology that we can do it.
That's going to be expensive.
We're not there. We're just not there. So they're setting standards for us to be there, and we're not there. Well, the coal, 7 billion tons of coal, wipe us out completely. The United States, we don't burn another lump of coal. There's going to be 7+ billion tons still burnt in the world. And it'll be burnt dirtier than ever. And we're not doing anything about it. And we keep talking about a global climate without even trying to jump in the market for a global fix. I'd rather do it here. And we're willing to. And we're doing everything humanly possible.
Let me ask you, China's putting coal plants in, but is China trying to develop clean coal?
Oh, yeah, they're doing it off because they don't have to go through the rules and regulations. The bottom line is China can do it at their own. And I will say this, China has the ability to do it in a much more rapid timing. But also, China, here's the thing that China knows. Anytime you put on these clean technologies, it takes away from the production of commercial power. So let's say you had a 900 megawatt plant, and you do carbon capture sequestration, full carbon capture, in a commercial plant. You might use up to 30% of that power in order just to capture it. So you build a plant based on 900 megawatts of commercial cells, but you only have 600 megawatts to sell. So when the president said, go ahead and build it and it'll be broke, you'll be broke, you can't do it, it's commercially not viable. We need it, and we're willing to move to the next technology, we're just not there. And we haven't, I don't think, developed and put enough money.
I agree with the senator. To take 30% of the power to nuclear capture carbon is something that the United States, nor China, nor India will use. But however, taking 10% of the energy is something palatable. And if coal, let's pretend, 30, 50 years from today, we're half renewables, and gas and coal and nuclear is the other half. One third. Let's just pretend one third, one third, one third. To capture the carbon at a 10% load of half is I get to multiply 0.1 by something, and I see electricity bill, maybe 5% more, 10% more. That's a manageable thing. China will, in a heartbeat, jump at that, right? And I think the United States will also. That if you increase the overall electricity bill by 5 or 10%, that's okay.
China doesn't have an EPA that basically says you have broken the law and you've got to stop and cease and desist and here's the fines you owe.
They do. They do have an EPA.
Well, they might have an EPA, but I can tell you one thing from what I know and what I've seen, they don't use all of the technology they have available to them because it robs the energy they need for their country. Now, the people are pushing back now. They want a cleaner environment. And until the average person or the mass of the people push back enough to get major changes, you won't have it. They put on a good front. They'll show you they have all the technology. They just won't use it. But that's
I actually think it's changing.
It is
changing. And for those of you who have been to China, you know how awful the air pollution can be. For those of you who haven't been, imagine LA and multiply a few times. It's bad. It's seriously, seriously bad. And what's happening is you are seeing the beginnings of an environmental anti-pollution movement. It's very similar to what happened in the United States and led to the creation of EPA
60s,
and all.
70s.
Yeah, in the late 60s and 70s, where people started saying, we don't want our children breathing dirty air. I think there's actually a bit of a correlation between the emergence of a middle class as people become more stable, economically stable in their personal lives, their communities, their states. They become more focused on issues like pollution. So you have that happening in China. You have the stability. You have the one-child policy. And there really is an environmental movement. And the President Obama was recently in China and announced a deal with the Chinese, which got a lot of attention on carbon. It is as much for the Chinese, I believe, about conventional pollution as it is about the greenhouse gases. Because everything they are committing to do to drive down their carbon pollution from the burning of fossil fuels will bring with it cleaner air in real time, in the same way that we were able to achieve cleaner air in the United States because EPA had regulations requiring the reduction in pollutants from smokestacks.
Carol, let me just ask one question on that. The president just signed some agreement with the Chinese to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 2030.
It starts then, but
No,
it goes
it
out.
Starts in 2030, right?
Yeah, that's when
Well,
they start to bend
I
the
know
curve.
that. So let me say exactly what the Chinese agreement was. They said by 2030 or earlier, they will cap carbon emissions.
Right.
They will cap coal use. They will start to bring it down. If you look at what China has been doing in the last, I think, 6 years, they've more than doubled their carbon emission. It's gone like that. Now, if you talk, I was there a couple times in the last couple of months in very private conversations with the ministers. They are deadly serious because they see both the climate risk, especially in northern China, the water supply, and the local pollution mix as something. There's a very strong thing. For the first time, the Chinese citizens are saying, I'm willing to pay more to get it clean. This is only in the last couple of years. 5 years ago, you wouldn't hear that. It didn't exist.
Why are they going to wait till 30 to...
No, well, so
They can clean up the particulates now. They have the
they are
technology
cleaning.
for that.
They're
That's
trying to clean.
right.
No, that will be capped. Now, if you talk to them, they'll say, really, what we want to do is do it by 2025 or sooner. But if you look at what their carbon emission, it went crazy like that. Okay, and so their part of the agreement, the goal, was actually much more ambitious. Now, if you talk to them privately, they say, no, we want to do it by 2025. We are really serious about this.
But India is ramping up to use more than ever before. India is going unchecked
India has
right
a different
now.
set of
India
challenges.
is not as controlled.
Is not as controlled. It does not have the same financial wherewithal that China has. But partly to your question, so they still have, what's the percentage of Chinese that don't have electricity, household electricity? I mean, so they're still looking at having to provide more electricity. So part of we're going to grow and then we're going to flatten and then we're going to come down is accounting for the growth in providing more electricity. India has 300 million people without electricity.
Yeah, but China is pledged by 2030, but they're really hoping by 2025, 20% renewable energy by 2020. Okay, they're promising. Okay,
go ahead.
And but here's the scenario that's unfolding as we speak. You have a one-child policy. When you have a one kid, you expect in modern China that child will grow up and live to 70, 80, whatever, okay? A full adult life. And now all of a sudden, this pollution has gotten so bad, and we're still discovering how bad it is in terms of cancer, in terms of emphysema, in terms of, let's say, the verdict is not in. If it turns out that their one child dies at age 50, this is going to be a national tragedy that the government will take the direct hit for. And boy, does the government know this.
But they're taking a hit already because they're seeing the same increase in asthma rates among children that we started to experience related to pollution.
But this is much, much worse than anything we saw in LA smog.
No, I agree it's worse, but they don't have to wait for their children to die early. Their children are experiencing health effects
they see
today.
the asthma, and the people in Beijing and further north in Harbin province, they look out at the average air quality 2013 in Beijing as measured by the U.S. Embassy is the equivalent in the airports, those glass smoke-filled rooms that's kind of gray. It's as bad as those.
It's awful.
Average year-round breathing the air in Beijing is as bad as those smoke-filled rooms. That's how bad it is, as measured by the U.S. Embassy, which has started publishing the numbers.
We measure it.
We in the U.S. Embassy measure it.
The embassy.
Yeah, they measure. You know why they measure it?
For their
in
own
part
kids.
for their employees, whether or not their kids can go outside. It's about the kids of the embassy going outside.
It's bad. It's bad for anybody.
I went to China
in
2007. Went to Beijing, and I was going to be over there for 2 weeks. I came back 6 days, and somebody said, "Are you going to do anything over there?" I said, "What I found out, this is going to be another one of those places I've been one time. I don't need to go back." I wouldn't go to China, if somebody paid me to.
Let me move you to. Let me move you to another issue quickly. The question is, I don't think I need insurance for this program. Litigation insurance. The answer that everyone is hoping for is obviously renewables, and the question is, how viable are those renewables? And we have a question from the audience on that. What really is the future of alternative resources such as wind and solar when the model they're based on is not self-sustaining, meaning it takes government subsidies to allow these forms of energy development to really function? So, a lot of alternatives out there, not only wind and solar, geothermal, wind energy, all kinds of other alternatives, biomass, ethanol, etc.
Ethanol? No, never mind.
Oh, I knew I'd hit a button here somewhere.
Let's just stay on electricity for the moment.
So, how viable are these alternatives, these renewables? And which of the renewables do you think has the best chance of succeeding?
Well, look, since you looked at me, let me. Right now, in the United States, we have tremendous wind resources, especially in the upper Midwest. We have tremendous solar resources in the Southwest. you would need, in order to capture this and use it, you would need a distribution system, an electrical distribution system that actually could port things 1,000 miles. We actually don't have an electrical system that does that. Because, you know, if you only look at locally, you know, the wind stops blowing, the sun stops shining, but the more distant you get, the better it gets. But right now, we're roughly 4.5%, 5% wind. We're less than 1% solar today in total electricity generated. That's going to is rapidly changing. We're 6.5% hydro. Within the next 2 or 3 years, wind and solar is going to overtake hydro. It will easily go to 10%. But here's the thing, and you have to be honest about this. Imagine 30 years from today, we're 50% renewable. The standby backup power is also part of the cost of renewable, because there would be a polar vortex in the Northeast where you get really bad weather for a couple of weeks. You're not going to store batteries for a couple of weeks. You can store day-night, right? You're not going to store seasonal. So the real cost of renewables would also include the standby power, that energy on demand that you will need. That is absolutely true. However, 20 years from today, it's going to get very, very good, I think. The renewables will get really inexpensive. I think, I've said this publicly, I'll say it to you, within 5 years for wind, 3 years for wind, 4 more years for solar, we don't need subsidy.
So they'd be at price parity.
Yeah, they would be price parity with new natural gas plant if natural gas were $4 a million BTU.
We've been subsidizing wind for 20 years, correct?
We've been subsidizing oil for 100. Just, but who's counting?
So actually, I was asked that in Congress. You know, so don't you think when is there going to be end to subsidy? And so actually, we've been subsidizing wind and solar since the late 70s, if you really want to start the clock. Mm-hmm. And we've subsidized fossils since the turn of the 20th century, right? If you really want to start the clock.
Talking about the credits.
Credits, all the tax advantages. So I said, look, we'll make a deal. No more fossil subsidy after 100 years, no more renewables after 50 years. We'll just end them all.
What's fossil subsidy?
An oil depletion allowance is a subsidy, right? That's a tax break.
You would agree with that, right? Yeah.
Okay. I would say tax advantages, what are called mastered limited partnerships. Mastered limited partnerships are an organization where you guys can invest in. It's a tax law that it makes. It's a favorable treatment that enables you to fund fossil much lower price. That is only available to oil, gas, coal, and gas pipelines.
You're talking about distributions to stockholders?
No, this is in a partnership. Kinder Morgan is a pipeline company.
Yeah.
It's a master limited partnership. Corporate, there is no corporate.
It's an MLP.
Yeah, that's right. MLP is a master limited partnership. That is a preferred tax advantage that is not open to renewable energy.
Right. Well, but
I think they would take it. They would give up their production tax credits for an MLP. The renewables.
I agree.
In a heartbeat.
But an MLP is, I mean, you're just distributing. You're making distributions to share.
Let me explain to the audience what a mastered limited partnership is. If you're a partnership, like a law firm, there is no corporate center. The partners get taxed on whatever income bracket they're in. If you're a corporation, like ExxonMobil, the corporation gets taxed, and then if you're a shareholder, you get taxed. So
you get taxed on a dividend.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. Correct. So in mastered limited partnership, including pretty big things like the biggest pipeline builders in the United States, have no corporate tax. Now, the difference is you can own shares of Kinder Morgan as, it's not a 40-person law firm. It's open to a wider class of investors. Because it's open to a wider class of investors, the money is cheaper. Right? It's a golden rule. If only a few people can loan you, hey, you're going to have to pay their price. If the whole public can own you, as you do in stock, the cost of money for bonds is cheaper.
Well, you're saying Kinder Morgan is tightly held?
No, Kinder Morgan is an example of a master limited partnership.
I understand.
Now, if you're a big solar farm or wind farm, you can't have a master limited partnership. It's against the law. If you look at the companies in the United States that have this favorable tax treatment. There is no corporate center. There are 4 industries, and they're the fossil industries: coal, oil, gas, and gas pipelines. I would love it if the United States Congress can allow wind and solar to have a master limited partnership and get rid of the production tax credit, get rid of the investment tax credit, and get rid of the oil depletion allowances and a few other things.
And get rid of the MLP.
Let me try to grab this thing. We got about 15
We're in
minutes
tax
left.
policy now. We've really.
Let me try to get as short an answer as I can get as we ask these questions.
Is this a contest?
There's a ban on exporting crude oil that's been in place because of the concern about price shock and obviously trying to protect our security. But we've got an awful lot, as you pointed out. We're close to independence in terms of the amount of oil we're producing. Isn't it time to get rid of the ban on exporting crude? We could obviously help supply countries in Eastern Europe that are under blackmail from Russia with regards to energy. Is it time to end the ban on exporting oil and gas?
Exporting crude.
Crude.
Heavy crude. Let me just say, we just had a hearing on this, and basically not just the crude, but also on LNG, but we'll talk about crude right now. And it's hard for the average person, hard for people in West Virginia to say, okay, if you open up and allow crude to be exported, knowing that we're importing crude, that I can make them understand that it might be cheaper, the gasoline might be cheaper at the pump. It doesn't really resonate, doesn't make sense. How we can export while we're still importing, but yet it'll be cheaper. My take on this, and we were talking in the hearing, is I said, if we're going to export, I know market forces, it basically changes the Brent pricing, right? If we put more oil in the global market than just the North.
Explain what you mean by Brent.
It's the pricing basically that the OPEC has established, and it's the price that most of the world oil is moved on, except North American. Ours is moved under the WTI. So we're different pricing.
But there's an arbitrage between Brent and WTI of about $10.
It's bigger than it's ever been right now.
Right.
No, it's been more than this. Yeah.
So anyway, let me just say,
somebody give me an answer.
and
in
45.
a nutshell, I don't think the American public, I don't think the public would support we voting in Congress saying that we're going to have open export of crude now, knowing that we're still buying. I think that you, and I know people in West Virginia, if we had a policy based on that we would export for strategic purposes, for our national interest, our security of our nation, helping those countries basically where they're held captive by Russia and other oil.
Yeah, but who's going to make a decision whether this is...
EPA? Well, somebody's got to.
Great idea.
Boone, are you for or against still lifting the ban?
I'd export because it will level out Brent and WTI is what will happen. And I know I agree to a guy sitting out there saying, I don't get it. You're going to export and we're importing. We got a ship going out and one passing right there coming in. Doesn't
It's
make
going to be
sense.
cheaper.
Yeah.
And it's hard to sell that.
Carol?
But I'm for it.
Look, oil is a global commodity. It is basically priced globally. I think we should fully participate in the global market. I think we will reap the greatest amount of benefits. But having said that, we should use less of it.
We should what?
Use less of it.
Steve?
It's not good for the environment.
Yes or no?
I think it's all right. People will not understand this
Yes, they
two-way
won't.
flow because it goes into the details of refineries and what they can refine and not refine. Okay, that our refineries are currently set up to refine a certain type of oil and not the other type of oil, and that's why you can send ships this way, and it would be cheaper. But I would agree with the senator. The public's not going to understand
There's
it.
serious debate
Well,
going on whether we do
do.
it or not. It's yet to be seen.
All right,
So, but did you ask us
Wait
about
a second.
LNG?
I'm still answering the question.
Answer it.
You are on exporting oil. Every day you export 4 million barrels of product
Yeah.
from the refinery.
That's right.
Big
In the
exporter of
United
product.
States.
Not crude.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
We export gas, but not crude.
No, we export mostly diesel.
Well, fuel.
Diesel.
Well, the price is so high on diesel.
All right. California recently implemented a cap and trade program generally how that operates. Do you see that as a viable way to regulate greenhouse gases?
I would like something much simpler, something that can't be gamed. I would like something that has clear signals. It can start very, very low. I think the California cap and trade has a floor on it.
It does.
And that's good. And it also has a ceiling. So you have some market efficiency, but it can't be gamed as much as Europe gamed it.
Europe messed it up.
Europe messed it up completely,
Right.
and they know that. And
They had the cap and trade.
they had a cap and
They
trade.
didn't manage it properly. They had way too many allowances
Yes.
out there. They weren't getting the kind of market behavior. Look, the whole idea of cap and trade comes from the 1990 Clean Air Act. It was a Republican idea. It was to deal with the acid rain problem rather than putting regulations on each smokestack to reduce SOx, sulfur dioxide. It was to allow industry to figure out how they would meet a cap, an overall cap, and if your facility was above, you might lower the emissions, or you might buy credits from somebody who was below. It had a huge impact in terms of achieving an environmental outcome and doing it in a very, very cost-effective manner, far more cost-effective.
This was a great Republican idea, you're saying.
I just said so, yes. I gave you credit.
In Bush one.
And
Bush
Bush
one, it
one
was a
signed
pioneering.
it.
Yeah, Bush one.
This was a
Was
very,
Bush one,
this is
that's
a
right.
hugely important concept that got embodied in the Clean Air Act of 1990.
I'm going to take this back to my camp.
Okay, we'll do that. And I think that on a sector-by-sector basis, now what Henry Waxman and Markey and all of us tried to figure out how to do was take that very successful program and apply it economy-wide. That turned out to be, first of all, it ended up not having the votes, but it was just way, way complicated.
Yeah.
But
That's the
on
one
a
I shot.
sector, that's the one he shot, yeah. On a sector-by-sector basis, which is what California is looking at doing, it can make, I think, an awful lot of sense in terms, again, of finding the economic efficiency. And what California, they just auctioned off the credits that people need to emit and to bring down the pollution. You guys just generated $1 billion in revenue that will come back into, whether it's mass transit, high-speed rail, that's for you all to debate. But what they're showing is that you can achieve an environmental gain, you can generate revenue, which is all good news. So will we ever get there nationally? I don't think in the near term, but what is very likely is as states start to grapple with reducing carbon emissions from power plants, which is EPA has proposed and will finalize later this year. If that goes into effect, or when that goes into effect, I think states will opt into programs like California's.
All right, let me ask you all the same question I asked you with the students. Steve made the point that when looking out at the students, that ultimately, the whole issue is whether or not we're going to make their lives better. It's the dream of our parents, to make sure that our children's lives are better, and they're going to grow, into a world in which they're going to be facing these challenges related to energy. So I want to ask each of you very quickly: do you think that in the next 30 or 40 years that we in fact will have a better energy program, one that does reduce the threat and moves to renewables, or do you think in 40 years we're going to pretty much be in the same place? Joe?
I think we'll be better. I think that we will develop technology. We'll use, if we can adopt an all-in energy policy until we have the fuel of the future, and that's going to be 3-4 decades down the road probably, if not more. But I think that we can move forward, and we can show the rest of the world it can be done. We have to also be willing to change our trading policies too. I mean, we can't let people have an open market, open access to our markets with no quid pro quo, if you will. If we're going to abide by these laws with the new technology, then we should say, if a global fix, it's going to take everyone participating on this beautiful globe of ours. And we have the ability with a $17 trillion GDP to do that. We're not using the might of our markets. We're just not doing it. We're talking a good game, but we're not doing anything with it.
Okay, Boone, we're going to be better or not?
Oh, we'll be better, sure.
Will you be here? Will you be here?
Absolutely.
I'll try to.
Okay, good. Perfect.
Carol?
No kidding. I mean, sure we're going to be better.
All right.
We're not fools, and we maybe don't Yeah, we're going better.
Okay, Carol?
So by better, I'll define what better means to me, which is we are reducing our carbon pollution, and I think we will be. I think we will transition to a new energy economy much more rapidly than any of us anticipate, because once we get going, it will be a no-brainer.
I would say I would agree with Carol. I was astounding how fast solar prices have fallen in the last 4 years. It's just shocking. It would better than my wildest dreams.
Doctor, give them an example of what you're paying for average coal, what you're paying for maybe nuke, and what you're paying for gas, what you might be, if you can just roughly.
Okay. So new natural gas, a new natural gas plant, it depends on what you price natural gas at.
Quickly.
And so 5 cents a kilowatt hour.
5 cents.
Wind with the production tax credit, without taking out the production tax credit, it's less than 6 cents today. It's really less than 3 cents with the production tax credit. Solar is now selling, contracts in Texas are now selling for 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay? So it was shocking how fast that came down. So,
and coal?
New coal is way out of the league because of all the emissions requirements.
Coal used to be at 3 and 4 cents in our
but
state.
it's not. It's
Look,
new coal plant.
Let me bring this to a close by saying, I think the greatest thing for the United States is our ability to innovate and to be creative.
That's right.
That's what will bring us the future with regards to cleaner energy.
Leon,
Let me thank all of you for participating. We're at an end.